Hi, today I will be discussing Brazil's transformation from 1945 to 1995 and some major changes that they went through. During these 50 years, Brazil experienced democracy, military dictatorship, and rapid economic growth. Major social changes, and eventually a return to democracy. By looking at these changes, we can see how Brazil evolved. Brazil in 1945. At the end of World War II, Brazil was entering a new period of change. Their dictator/president, Getulio Vargas, had ruled with authoritarian powers, but growing pressure for democracy as it was spreading around the world led to his removal in 1945. Brazil faced major challenges, including poverty, inequality, and political instability. However, many people hoped the post-war period would bring democracy and modernization. This year marks a starting point for Brazil's political transformation. Democratic Brazil, which was 1945 to 1964. After Vargas left and was taken out of power, Brazil adopted a new constitution and held democratic elections. Political parties became active again instead of just one, and citizens gained greater political participation. At the same time, industrialization expanded and cities grew rapidly as people moved from rural areas into more dense cities looking for jobs. While the economy developed, many Brazilians still live in poverty, creating tensions that could contribute to political conflict. This is a political party campaign photo of Vargas, who was actually re-elected in a democratic election after being removed from power. This is a map of Brazil in 1945. Building Brasilia. One of Brazil's biggest projects was the Constitution of Brasilia, a completely new capital city standing where Rio de Janeiro is. President Juscelino Kubitschek wanted to modernize the country and encourage development away from the coast. Brasilia became the capital in 1960 and symbolized progress and national ambitions. However, the project was very, very expensive and increased government debt. The Cold War and Brazil. The Cold War had a major impact on Brazil. After the Cuban Revolution in 1959, many people feared communism that was spreading around the world, and they didn't want it to spread through Latin America. Brazil became politically divided. Some groups wanted major social reforms, while others feared those reforms and thought they were the cause and were too close to communism. Because the United States was determined to stop communists' influence in America, even Brazil became part of a much larger global complex. This is a news article talking about the coup d'état, the military coup of 1964. Military dictatorship. During the dictatorship, political freedoms were limited. In 1964, the military overthrew President João Goulart, who was elected, and took control of the government. Military leaders had argued that they were protecting the country from communism and instability. The United States supported anti-communist government during the World War and viewed the coup positively. This was one of the most significant events in Brazilian history because it ended the democracy that they fought for previously and began 20 years of military dictatorship rule. This is the overthrowing, and this is a news article talking about how many people were involved. Their military dictatorship, 1964 to 1985. During the dictatorship, political freedoms were limited. Opposition groups were restricted as well. Censorship increased, and many critics of the government were arrested, as they do in a cult of personality. Human rights organizations later reported cases of torture on political people and political prosecution. While some supported the government because they believed it provided stability, others argued that the loss of freedom was too great a cost to stop communism. The period raises important ethical questions about balancing security and democracy. The Brazilian economic miracle. Between the late 1960s and early 1970s, Brazil experienced rapid economic growth known as the Brazilian economic miracle. Factories expanded, infrastructure improved, and the economy grew. To many observers, Brazil appeared to be becoming a more economic powerhouse. However, not everyone had benefited equally. There was a lot of wealth that was still remaining concentrated among the upper classes and a large amount of inequality in the lower regions, which would affect millions of Brazilians. This shows the economic growth does not always improve for everyone. This is a highlight project that they are building, and this is just what some of the factories looked like as it was growing in Brazil. Social and cultural change. Brazilian society changed dramatically during these years. Cities such as São Paulo and Rio de Janeiro expanded rapidly as more people moved to urban areas from rural areas. Television became more common, helping people create a stronger national culture, as well as Brazilian music and football also became very big symbols of their cultural identity. This is two groups of Brazilian musicians playing across the street, and this is one of their best soccer teams. Despite the modernization that was continuously happening, many of the urban areas still were struggling with extreme poverty and overcrowding, showing that economic development does not always equal wealth. Resistance of the dictatorship. By the late 1970s, the opposition to the military was growing fast. Student workers and religious groups organized protests and demanded a change. As public pressure increased, the military government had slowly started to lose support, and in 1985, civilian rule returned, ending dictatorship as they pushed for large strikes. A new constitution was introduced in 1988, protecting democratic rights and freedoms. This marked one of the most important turning points in Brazil's history as they returned back to the dictator they fought for. Luiz Inácio was an important was an important figure of this time as he started working for labor rights and helped organize the labor strikes that were going on against the government. This is an ad for the strikes, and these are sort of what the strikes were looking like. Resistance and inevitable return of democracy. By the late 1970s, the opposition to military rule was strongly growing. Many young people, like we've talked about in class, were the ones working for this. Students, workers, and religious groups organized protests and demanded changes. There were labor strikes. As public pressure started to increase, the military government slowly started to lose support, and eventually by 1985, the civilian rule had ended, ending the dictatorship. A new constitution was introduced in 1988, protecting the democratic rights and freedoms to avoid any military takeovers again. This was one of a very important turning point in Brazilian history as they returned back to their original democracy. Luiz Inácio was a key figure in the resistance as they were a spokesperson for labor rights and stood up and made organized strikes against the government. Return of previous democracy. This page shows it piggybacks onto what I talked to previously. This page is all of the rallies and support after they regained democracy, and this is one of their Congress rooms. When we talked about political change, obviously the military rule ended and civilian government was restored. Constitution gained voting rights, liberties, and democratic institutions. Brazil in overall world politics. Throughout this whole period of returning from democracy back to democracy, Brazil had become increasingly important on their own in world politics. During much of the beginning of the Cold War, it aligned strongly with the United States and that of the rest of the Western world. By the 1990s, though, in this period, as they regained their own independence and constitutional laws, they had developed into a major regional power with their own significant economic and political influence in South America. Even though they were still struggling very much in rural areas, there was a step towards freedom of the people. These are some of the rural areas that we're talking about, very densely packed together, stacked on top, facing a lot of poverty still today. Ethical evaluation. There are several ethical issues emerged during this period. Was the military justified in removing an elected government to protect communism? Can economic growth justify censorship, torture, and the loss of democratic rights just to avoid all of those things that were going on in the other world, like communism? Should foreign countries interfere with another nation's politics, coming in and helping? My conclusion by all my research that I've done here is that while dictatorship contributed to modernization and economic growth, and lots of good things were seen in this dictatorship time, these achievements do not outweigh the violations of human rights and the democratic freedom that the people of Brazil were facing during that period. Overall, Brazil's history from 1945 to 1995 shows a nation of full transformation, from struggle to modernization and a new step in towards success for certain minority groups. The Cold War pressures economic development and, as we've seen in other countries, determination of its people to restore democracy and build national identity. By 1995, Brazil had become a democratic and influential country, very different from the one that had started in 1945 after World War II.